Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with Tim Richmond. Tim is the Executive Vice President and CHRO of AbbVie, a research-driven Fortune 100 biopharmaceutical company with about 50,000 employees, serving more than 50 million people treated by AbbVie's products in over 175 countries. In addition to being a financial leader, AbbVie is now consistently recognized as one of the great places to work. Tim is a fellow of the National Academy of Human Resources, is on the executive committee of the Human Resources Policy Association, or HRPA, the advisory board for the Center on Executive Compensation, and is currently the chairman of the board of the Center for Executive Succession. Tim, as always, thank you for joining us. We sincerely appreciate it.
Always great to be here.
You've often talked about the importance of analytics. Actually, we just had a great conversation about that and the importance of using data analytics to both help really understand how things have worked, whether they're working well or not. And then, well, let's start with that. So can you say a little bit more about why that's so important for you and the HR function in particular?
I think there is a comment related to the HR function, and part of it is that we're not always comfortable using data to tell a story. You know, we'll say, well, we believe certain things to be true, or certain things to be good or preferred, but we don't always use the benefit of data to either prove that hypothesis to be true, or to just reinforce that this has more meaning because I have data to validate this assumption, whether it's about a person or about an organization or a topic of the day. So I like data very much. And HR is a very data-rich environment, and I think the best organizations, the best CHROs are using data to understand their workforce, they're using data to tell a story, or they're using data to influence others. And I think a really smart approach to human resources is to use data not just because it's interesting, but because you found a way to make it important.
You talked about it as the evidence base, and that of course makes a lot of sense. Where do we in HR tend to come up short in that? Because as you said, we have a lot of it. So where do we not fulfill our potential that way?
Well, just take this idea of there's a difference between interesting and important. And so I remember this one time I joined a new team and I was asked to take on this responsibility. And I said, well, do we have a scorecard? Do we have data? And they said, oh, yes, we have a scorecard. And they produced it, and it was a 30-page deck of data. But it didn't answer the question. And to me, the question quite simply was, how are we doing? How are we doing serving others? How are we doing serving, in this case, hiring managers? The data was around the noise of the process, but it did not answer the question. So I think an astute HR person would say, I want to use data to what I described earlier as telling a story, but I also want to use data to help answer, are we fully meeting the needs of those that we serve?
We need to actually use it to answer questions. Then there's the translation part, and you've mentioned now twice the importance of telling the story. So how can we get better about doing that, using that, telling the story in a way that is actually convincing?
Yeah, I think with an outcome in mind. And part of it is you have to be inquisitive. You have to have a hypothesis. You know, do we have strength and quality of people leadership in our company? Does leadership matter to performance? Does better leadership drive higher levels of engagement? Does our work around equity and equality lead to higher levels of inclusion, a greater sense of belonging? So you have to start with sometimes a question and think about, well, if I have this question or I have this hypothesis, how can I answer it? Not just with a couple data points, which is sometimes the mistake we make, but with lots of data that's statistically significant, can be validated. And I think that's where you're going to find greater strength in your conviction. You're going to get more, I think, support internally. It says, hey, look at this HR organization. I didn't expect them to be so good with data and analytics. And they know what they're doing. They're looking at it really holistically and not just from a functional view. And I also say we have the benefit that we have tons of data. I mean, it's a benefit and it's a problem at the same time, right? So we have to differentiate interesting from important. And we also have to know how to create data to help answer those questions. So as an example, we actually want more differentiated data points on each individual. If you and I work for the same company, we should have lots of different ways to understand you and lots of different ways to understand me relative to each other and relative to the standard. Performance, potential, leadership, all those variables, we want data. And if I have it, then I've got this warehouse that can really help me know my workforce.
So with all this data, and we'll talk about AI a little bit more in a moment, but you know a lot about people, and this is presumably is going to happen even more in our new environment. What is the role of helping share data back with employees, or the responsibility we have of making sure that that data not just is private, but that we're not taking advantage of it in some way that's harmful to employees?
There's a lot of questions we're still going to have to answer, but I always start with where we're at now. Right now, technology and this generative AI is helping us be more efficient and effective, to the point you just asked, serving our employees, serving our people leaders. We're giving them access to information. It's more democratic, it's more valid, it's more available. I could do it right now on my phone. I could look up some element, I could ask a question about, how do I do this? What's my balance in my 401k? I could do it all right now. So there's an element of efficiency. And I think greater accuracy because of it. And then candidly, I have to allocate fewer resources to those basic questions, and I can allocate more resources to the more high-value-added parts of human resources. But the next phase, that next generation of technology, candidly, I'm not 100% sure how it can be best utilized, but I just know that we'll have a great opportunity to better know our workforce. We'll have an opportunity to create better leadership, greater capability. I think in our case, I work for a pharmaceutical company, and you think about how it can be applied around the science, how it can be applied around the regulatory parts of our work. We're a very data-rich company in that sense as well, and so I think the technology has great promise. Now we'll just see how well we can utilize it.
All right, and so it's still on this AI topic in general. How do you see it changing the employee experience? So you talked about being able to probably reach in and find out more about where is our 401k and that sort of stuff. Do you see other ways that things will fundamentally change for employees?
Yes, and we can see technologies already being used in areas like in talent acquisition, right? Which is, if I have 300,000 people in our job applicant database, help me find the best person to fill this role, or the best persons to fill this role. So how do I use technology with people to drive the right talent outcomes? And I think it's critical that there is that with people, otherwise there's a slippery slope. And I do think it's going to be more so around making people aware of what's available to them, making them more in tune, and I think it's going to make people more effective in their jobs. Less, I think something is true, or I think I know how this works, and so greater clarity, greater confidence. Now, there's always that question of how far this goes and how good the technology gets. I'm not smart enough to know the difference right now. All I know is that we should be paying attention. We should be thinking about applications of technology. We should be thinking about value that we can offer to someone else. How much it's going to impact work, I don't know. And I don't want to be so far out in front. I also don't want to be so far behind, right? So I want to be somewhere right in the middle. I'm paying attention. I'm thinking a lot about the application of technology into our future. And I think the best companies will try and do that.
And AbbVie already is a technology advanced company based on all that you already do. So I don't know how much employees at AbbVie are actually thinking about this sort of thing, but there's a general concern, I think, among employees to some extent about, can this start to replace me? How do you help, we can't predict the future, but how do you help them just feel comfortable that, that you're still going to have the employee interest in mind as we go forward?
I think the best lens we can have is looking backwards on all the advances of technology that we've had over time. And all that it's typically done is allowed us to be more productive. It's made our jobs better. It's made us communicate in ways that we weren't able to before. Think of even during the pandemic, the idea that you could go onto Teams or Zoom and be able to engage with your workforce globally while we're all dealing with the pandemic. So technology is a useful tool that should help drive efficiency and productivity. Is it going to be something more than that? I don't know. I think at this point in time, I'm more of a skeptic than a believer. Like I said, I don't want to be too far behind, but I also don't want to overplay the hand. I think AI and generative AI is more of a platform to be utilized by people to drive better outcomes. In our case, it'd be better outcomes for the patients that we serve. As a human resources professional, it could be a better outcome for the employees that we serve and managers that we serve. But I don't see it as something where it's going to turn it all upside down. And part of it's the nature of the work that my company does. We're not a technology company. We don't lead with our technology capability as a driver of business. I think it'll be an enabler of business if we use it well.
If we think about kind of the ethics of bringing generative AI into the organization, and some of that is about transparency, I think. How much are we letting employees So you mentioned the part about it needs to be empowering employees. There still needs to be human involved. How do you see that dynamic playing out? How much do we have to tell people what the code is? Do we need to tell them when AI is involved in the decision making? Do we, at one end of the spectrum, AI is just making decisions? How do you see that playing in relationship with our employees and the workforce?
There's good questions there, right? And I'm not 100% sure. Right now, what we're trying to say to people is, look, this technology exists, like whether it's through providing services to our employees, and again, like I can do it on my phone right now, I could pull it out and I could ask these questions I described earlier. So that's an example of we're making you aware of a technology that has some benefit and some value for you. We don't yet say, but I wouldn't know that people would be totally surprised to think that there's a lot of technology or capability in technology for the talent acquisition process. Otherwise, the screening of a lot of original resumes would be much more laborious. Or candidly, would never get to know people. There's not enough ways to try and identify all the best people out of your, huge databases that you might have. So technology helps us make connections. It might also give us insights. I still go back to what I said earlier. I still think people need to use this technology then in the application of some value driver in the business. I want to get to know my talent better. I have better ways to capture that quicker with more clarity and validity. Now let me go talk to the business leader and say, let me talk to you about your organization. Let's talk about the health of our workforce. Let's talk about the levels of potential that exist. Let's talk about different capabilities. So I think it drives insights. I don't think it replaces the people element.
And you mentioned that one of the advantages, of course, is that it helps us be more efficient. And even you mentioned the working remotely, which of course became such a big deal during COVID and after. And again, AbbVie has long been out in front of being a great place to work and helping create some sort of balance. I know you lead by example and do a great job of that. Just from a kind of a remote work perspective, how do you, because we've been hearing a lot in the news lately about people now swinging back towards everyone's got to be in the office. Right. How do you see not what's right or wrong about being in or out of the office, but kind of the philosophy of optimizing productivity?
I think it has to start with a notion of all in the service of what. And so if we say this is all in the service of performance as a business, all in the service of serving the patients that we serve, or on behalf of your shareholders, whatever your frame of reference is, and maybe it's all those things. But at different times, you've seen companies change whatever it is that they're doing. And my theory always has been that there's probably one thing primarily going on, which is the business is underperforming. Or a CEO is not happy, which is highly correlated usually with something that's not performing at expectations. So I think when you see people making changes, I'm always watching for that. I'm looking for the signals, I'm looking for the data, I'm looking for the comment. Why change? And so I think it usually relates to that. For ourselves, I think the winning word for all this now, and actually it's one I appreciate and I celebrate, because I remember back when I first started, and it was, the expectation is it was 5 days a week at least, and it was early morning to sometime in the evening that you could find a way to tolerate, and that's just not where we're at right now. We have a hybrid model. The key thing about it doesn't matter if we're 3 days in the office, which we are, or 2, or whatever it might be. I'm a believer in a couple things. One is we're better and we're more collaborative and we perform at our best. It stylistically supports us when we're in the workforce together, in the workplace together. That still means, though, that we can offer a hybrid choice, and we do, and we can still operate and perform. And I always think the biggest risk to having to change our model is performance. I think that people who are fully remote, I worry about development of talent. I have younger children who are entering the workforce in the next 3 to 4 years, and if they had a fully remote option, I'm not sure I'd recommend it for them. I think about all I learned early in my career about being at work, observing people, seeing how work gets done best. There's a value in that, and part of it's building relationships, but also I'm a big believer in this idea of observing and learning from others. And I also think from a development standpoint, it's also hard. I could be productive in my job today, but how available am I for development and how exposed am I to development if I'm only remote? So I think it'll be interesting. I still think the winning word in all this is flexibility. I'm enjoying more flexibility than I've ever had. I don't expect to want to have to go back to what it was before. So I always say to my team candidly, the most important thing we can do is perform as a business. If we perform as a business, no one cares where our model is.
So, and you talked about flexibility, but it also sounded a lot like intentionality. About, because you identified very key elements about what's valuable about being together. So making sure, presumably when they are together, that there is a reason for that, and separating out the work, I guess, to which can be remote versus learning from each other.
We do. We really reinforce with our people leaders, and particularly our leaders of cross-functional teams, be transparent, be intentional. Hey, look, on Tuesdays, we're going to get together as a team, and we're going to meet during the morning, we're going to cover these topics. People show up gladly to know we have purpose and we have a reason, and that's part of my job. What hurts is if you say, I don't have a strategy, I don't have an intention, no one knows what's expected around here, and people leaders aren't clear. That's a problem. Then people are guessing, and that's not positive for anybody. So real clear expectations from people leaders is a huge factor in people's support for this. Because then when you have that, and you say to someone, we're going to have that team meeting on Tuesday and I need everyone to be here, 98% of the time you'll say, I'll see you Tuesday. On that 2% of the time when you can't make it because you've got a conflict and you ask for support to be able to have a rationale to miss that one meeting, they'll say, you know what, that's fine. Right? So part of it is that classic case, it's pretty simple if you keep it that way. Supervisors working with their teams, employees working with their people leader, making it work best for everybody. And if we can retain that and retain that sense of flexibility, by also being clear about expectations and performing well together as a team, then we're all going to be fine.
And you, as you were talking about the kind of key word, and performance kept coming up. How do you think about that end performance? Because traditionally we were all about shareholders. You often, maybe always, invoke the patients as a key stakeholder, and then of course employees and local communities. AbbVie's amazing in all of those areas. How do you get the balance right as a leader of such a major organization of thinking about all those different stakeholders?
It's a good question, and I do use different words at different times for different audiences, but in the end I think they're highly correlated. Like our North Star is our patients, those that we serve. And I can think of it from a business perspective. If we're really having a remarkable impact on patients' lives, then my guess is our business is performing well. When we do our job well and we lead with science, that means the standard of care is being advanced. Patients are getting better outcomes. It's a tough business to be able to be that leader and to have that technology and that science be in one of your medicines, but it's what you kind of sign up for in this industry. So I always think if the patients are being supported, if the patients are front and center for us, they're the North Star, our business success will follow. And I'll also say from an HR standpoint, I tell my team all the time, if the business is successful, our success follows. I think it's highly correlated down the line. So it's not one at the detriment to the other. And again, if our patients, again as our North Star, are being served well, our business is performing, then our shareholders typically are happy as well. So I think doing what human resources people do a lot of times is threading the needle on all those different stakeholders. What you have to understand is, are they highly correlated? And maybe in some businesses they're not always. In ours it is, and that's a benefit to us, but it doesn't make it necessarily easy. And at different times you have to be acutely sensitive to that individual stakeholder.
So you talk about not easy things. One of the seemingly really big challenges at the moment, of course, is in an election year, and our world seems to be highly divided. How do you manage making sure that things stay civil in all of your organization, throughout the organization, at a time like this when things are extra tense about a lot of issues, but we could, picking any one of them?
One of the things that has changed, meaningfully changed in my tenure in this role, is the expectation of employees for companies to weigh in on factors outside of the company. And maybe it was a naive view when I first started doing this over 11 years ago as the head of HR for AbbVie. But I thought if we're a good company, right, we treat our people well, we have a strong culture, we're truly a great place to work, we live to that standard, people aren't going to ask us about what's going on in the community because they know we care about our people, we care about our patients that we serve. This is a good place. I don't have to ask the question here. And the reality is that's really changed. Whether that was good enough or not doesn't matter. The point is people want to know. Anytime something's happening in our communities, it's just an expectation employers have to have, heads of HR have to have, which is what's our comment going to be related to X, whether it's political, geopolitical, economic, name it. people want to know. And that creates challenges in some cases. Some things are easier, if you think of it this way, because there's just kind of a right or wrong. And then come out and state what you believe in and what you stand for. Other times, as much as I'll find someone on this side of the issue, I'll find someone equally on the opposite side. And that's a challenge for employers. We try and reinforce a couple things. Back in 2016 or 17, we worked on, and you've seen our principles, this articulation. And it literally started with me saying, I'm being asked more questions about things externally, and I'd like us to have a response of like, what is it we stand for and we believe in? So we created this articulation of these principles. And one of them is around embracing diversity and inclusion. And the only words that I ever required on the whole document, other than I wanted it done, was that we treat everyone equally with dignity and respect. And so anytime an issue comes up, I like to point to that, not because those were my words, but because it says those words and we believe it. We treat everyone equally with dignity and respect. And so tell me how you feel about this issue, what's on your mind. And sometimes you can make a statement about what you stand for and believe in on a particular issue, and that's good enough. Other times it's just not. And what you find is you have to engage with your workforce around these issues. And that means maybe I'm hearing it from this side and this side. I'm trying not to create more angst or more churn or more whatever it might be, friction or animosity. But what I'm really trying to do is create commonalities, what we stand for and believe in. I'm also trying to create a place that's safe. So that includes lots of listening in ways that I didn't expect. Sometimes there is no perfect outcome, but we're listening. And I think if you start with that basic concept of, in some cases we have listening sessions on important topics. We let people vent, we let people share. Sometimes we decide, okay, we need to do more. Sometimes we decide, let's do more listening, let's do more engaging. And so there's lots of different ways. There's no one-size-fits-all response. But for all those HR people out there and for future prospective heads of HR, what I've said, and I'll continue to say is, you'll be asked consistently about what you think about things that are going on in your communities and around the world. And I don't think that's going to change. I don't think that goes back to what it was before.
And no comment doesn't work anymore.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because somewhere in there, I can never say that I would have the perfect words, but this idea, again, in the principles that we say what we stand for and believe in, at least people can say we're clear about that. Maybe there's something we don't respond exactly how someone wants us to respond, but they know that we respect them, we're listening to them, we honor them, just like we would any employee. And sometimes that's all you can do, but that's better than, you're right, this idea of no comment. You can't often use that as an answer.
Dignity and respect. It'd be kind of nice if you guys could spread those principles across the whole country.
Yes, I think more
Not
people.
keep them just for AbbVie.
More people could benefit from that principle, yes.
Are there any hot button issues right now that you either just looking forward or when you wake up in the morning like this is quickly running to the top of my mind? And I mean, I know there's a lot.
There's a lot, but that's okay. Look, I still think a human resources professional today has all these things that are potentially complicating factors, and there's plenty of opportunity, and sometimes there's noise, and knowing the difference is critical. I still think in the end you'd say, do I know how individually or collectively this role I play or the function I happen to lead creates value in this company? And I always think of it in a couple of different ways. It's been reinforced by our CEO. And that is, first is like deliver the talent. The second is to create the culture, and I'll give you a little bit of both. On the deliver the talent, if I wake up every day, what am I like, oh my God, it's how do I bring more talent into this company, and how do I make sure that it continues to get better? So this idea of more and better is such a critical thought, and it's this never-ending thing, and it's kind of hard sometimes because you want things to be done, finished, boxes to check. There is no box to check on having enough talent, so more and better. And then culture, and there's also no finish line on that as well. But I think if you focus on the biggest drivers of performance, again, aligned in our case to our patients that we serve ultimately, all kinds of good things come back, which is this idea of talent and culture at a high standard, layers of leadership built to a standard over time. You've heard my story that we make the how equal to the what, so this idea that culture matters. You also get the benefit of creating the workplace that you want to work for. Sometimes for me, it always comes back to a really simple question. What kind of company do I want to work for? And that's where I set the bar. And I have very high expectations for the company that I choose to work for. And I have very high expectations for the people leaders that are part of it. And that's a driver for me every day.
And of course, speaking of people leaders, as a Center for Executive Succession, we couldn't possibly not ask you about your transition coming forward. So it seems to be textbook in terms of getting a new CEO, an internal candidate. What are some of the key things that you would point to as your role in helping make all of this go so smoothly?
Yeah, we'll have a CEO transition this July. It's been one that we've worked on for a long time, and our company is 11 plus years old, but we've been working on succession for that whole time. So the great lesson is always that talent isn't a static thing, and succession planning is not as well, nor is talent development. So it's always on a continuum, and it's always moving. And the question is, who are the right, first of all, what's the profile of the role that you're trying to fill? And who are the right candidates who can fit that profile in that right time frame? So for me, it's just like planning, like we do in R&D around medicines into our pipeline. The same thing is true around succession. So I'm really proud that it's not part of the scorecard, but it's part of the internal scorecard, which is, did you identify an internal successor to your CEO, someone that is aligned with your current strategy, that's aligned with what the goals and aspirations are as delivered by the board of directors to that new CEO? It makes you proud and humbled by the idea that you could get there. I'm excited about our future. It's just your point, it's like the practice in reality, well executed. And one of our analysts came back and said something like, well executed, well telegraphed, kind of like nothing to see here. And you're like, perfect. I'm gonna put that one on a frame and just put that on the wall, because that's what you want it to be if you do it well. So good response by shareholders, good response by our employees. No surprise to anyone who's really been paying attention. It's just what you'd want it to be.
Tim, great and sincere honor for me, and with a touch of sadness, though, to share in front of the possibly tens of people that might eventually watch this.
Yes.
But to sincerely thank you for your role as the chair of our advisory board for CES and all you have done over the years and will continue to do in your partnership with the University of South Carolina here. It's truly special for us, so thank you.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for all your partnership as well. And I think that is the key word, right? This is look, I'm here for a reason. I've told this before. We don't go to random schools. We come here for a reason. It's the quality of the students that exist at this school that you produce every year, but it's also the quality of the faculty, quality of the center. And to me, I'm highly motivated to be a part of it because I know the good work we do together.
Super. And perhaps, can I ask you to just say something about CES, about why anyone should consider joining CES, as you now finish up your term as our chair of our advisory board?
Well, obviously I'm biased at some level, but I always think, like, you don't give your time and energy to things that you don't have a passion for, and you don't give your time and energy for something you don't think you get value from. There's just too many things that can pull you in different directions. So for me, it's kind of like I can be conscious of it, or I could be less than that and still think, I want to be here, I want to be a part of it, I want to create value, I want to share, I want to partner. But also I just think if you're a CHRO and you're not a member of the center, you got to be asking yourself, why not? I mean, this is one of the most critical things that we do as heads of HR, and it can define our company's future and its success. And certainly you want to be good in this space.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
You just listened to another CHRO conversation. Today, Tim Richmond of AbbVie shared his views regarding the role of HR in driving business success. He also shared ideas for how HR can help create a balance in the future workplace between maximal employee flexibility and maximal operational excellence. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.